we're going to do now is we're going to take the PCB that we made earlier here for the Unshaven Fuzz that's now all populated. We're going to take this PCB that has nothing more than wires and stuff dangling from it, and we're going to put it into an enclosure so that we can actually really use it as a stomp pedal. So the first thing we need aside from the PCB for that is we need the other PCB, which is the triple pole double throw stomp switch, which in this case I've already pre-wired up. It already has two input jacks on, it has one input jack and one output jack. Then from that we're going to need a actual enclosure. So I have a 1590A style, Heyman style enclosure. It's already been powder coated with a nice venomous green, if you will. You'll also need a LED to show that stuff's going on. I got a little 3mm LED right here, and then I got a little hard to really show this, but the little bezel and plastic socket for that. Already on my bench I have all my washers and nuts pulled off of my input jacks and my pots and all that. I also have a power jack here, one of the Boss style ones. And another thing that's pretty important is if you go up to the website for this project, you should be able to pull out of the schematics and build of materials the layout. Also, it's nice to have some construction tape, scissors for obvious reasons, and that should pretty much get us going. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out this square, and we're going to lay this guy out onto the enclosure. And so now we have the enclosure with the markings that we're going to be trying to drill through here. Now while I'm here, I'm going to probably just green or blue cover this whole thing up, the green here with this blue tape. Alright, so now this thing is completely mummified in tape, with the exception of obviously in here, but that's not going to matter. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put some markings down for other things we're going to drill out. Typically the first thing I do is I go for the power going in on the top, if that's your style. When I was laying out the actual piece right here to see, I'll always try to make sure that this guy's not going to bump into things. Now because I'm working with a 1590A case that's therefore very small, I might also bend some of the leads back on this power connector so that I get more clearance and headroom here. But the gist of the idea is we're going to put a hole here on the top, dead center. Just take a Sharpie and get yourself a good center hole marked. Now the next thing you're going to be looking for is where you're going to put your stomp switch. Now this part is more art than science, I'm not going to lie. But I've basically came up with a templated piece that I've been using for this, and I just basically steal off of that. The idea that you're going to try to do, I'm going to show you via this template here, is you want to basically see where the PCB on this stomp switch is going to line up with this enclosure. And try to get it as close to the bottom as you can so that you have as much center space for your jacks and your PCB electronics. Gives you more stuff to work with. So right there we've marked where we want our stomp switch. The same thing is also going to be true about the input and output jacks. Now because this is again a 1590A enclosure, you're going to have to stagger these because the guitar jack itself is longer than two of these putting side by side here. So one's this way and then one's slightly higher. So you kind of can see that here with, actually let's look from the inside, you can kind of see the, yeah, it's kind of a hard angle to show you, but yeah, they're not quite in line with each other. So there's a little bit of staggering going on. Again, I kind of use this guy as my template. Which one is higher than the other one, that's your flavor, however you want to do it, doesn't really matter. I like to have my input jack slightly higher up and the output jack slightly lower, but that's just personal taste. Alright, and then the last thing you got to figure out what you want to do is where do you want that LED to pop out. I try to keep the LEDs a little bit off to the right because again that's where my input jack is a little bit higher up, so I got more room. Putting it over here on the left, I'm going to have to worry about the fact that the output jack is a little bit lower and starts to get a little too close to the stomp switch PCB. So I'll go for the right, and I'll try to get it more or less as close to the edge as I can, keeping in mind though that I can't go too close to the edge because I got to go have, you know, I got a wall here in the way. Can't deal with that. So next thing I do is I start drilling pilot holes. And basically what that means is I grab a really small bit, something like a 1/16 or a 1/8 drill bit, something really skinny. And my drill bit here is actually kind of nice. It has little laser guides, if you can kind of see that here. That gives me the ability to really hone in on this. One piece about drilling that really is important is be slow. This is not a race. The more careful you are with drilling, the better and more successful your hole should be. That, and you'll also run your bits a lot slower. Alright, now we have pilot holes. This will also make the next step here a lot quicker and a lot easier. And what is the next step? Step bits. Now, if you're going to build guitar pedals and you're going to do a lot, I cannot stress enough how awesome buying one of these are. This is a unibit, and this is a Klein unibit, so this is kind of a slightly more pricier one. But in the world of guitar pedal making, this is maybe the only unibit you need, because this goes through lots of small incremental steps down to the 32nd of an inch. And it goes from really, really small all the way up to a 1/2 inch, which is typically the largest thing you're going to ever drill in a guitar pedal. 1/2 inch being the actual power jack on the back. Other sizes that you'll look at, pots typically are 9/32 of an inch. The stomp switch itself is usually 15/32 of an inch. The LEDs, they can range. But what I've been typically using is what is that, 7/32 of an inch, right under a 1/4 inch. And then the jacks themselves on the side are typically 3/8 of an inch. Again, well, I'm over here in America, so I'm using SAE and not metric. You'll have to probably figure out what the conversions are in metric. But anyways, if you want to get this particular unibit, it's part number KTS, so it's Kilo Tango Sierra B Baker 01. And this thing is great. It's a little pricey, but it's probably going to be the only one you ever need. And so those are done. What's interesting about this one is on a 1590A enclosure, it's skinny enough this way in width that you'll actually get a little bit of the drill, the unibit, going into the inside. It won't show on the outside, so you don't have to worry about it, but don't worry when you see that, like, oh, that's the end of my enclosure right there. No, you're fine. Now for the top, for the power. Alright, now we have a fully drilled out enclosure. So next step is take off all. Now it's just a matter of assembling it all together. Typically what I'll go for first is the power, just because it's the most obnoxious one to get in there. So obviously with the nut off, set your jack in there. Now if you're curious on the wiring of this, because we are going to do that here shortly, the piece right here, the silver flat piece, which goes to the center pin, that's your center negative. And then you're gonna have this one here on the far ridge of the outside, that's your hot. And then there's this third one here, that's for switching. We're not gonna get into that, so you can pretty much ignore that one. So there we go, top is in. Next up, let's actually get the effects PCB installed. And now that's in there. So we got, as you can see, it's in the enclosure pretty good. Now before we can go put this guy in here, let's actually get that LED installed first. So what you do is take the nut off of the LED bezel, punch it through the front. Alright, so now the bezel is here, and you can see that the nut is enclosed. The next trick is to take your 3mm LED. In this case I'm using a blue one because why not? Blue's cool. And then you got this little guy right here, this little plastic rubber piece that you will be using to get that LED in there. So there's two little holes in this thing, and you're gonna feed the LED through it. And that basically gets right up to that LED. And just shove that LED in there because the pressure of that rubber piece is going to jam it in there. If you can, use some tweezers or something to further push it on in there. Next up, stomp switch. Now because we are dealing with a enclosure here that's very, very small, we're going to have to cram some stuff in here. So first things first, we now have the input and output jacks in there. The idea is going to be you do not want these two pieces touching each other, because then input is going to go touching, or the input tip and output tip are going to be touching each other, which basically is going to put it in permanent bypass, which defeats the whole purpose. But if you stagger them out perfectly, there's going to be just enough of a gap to make sure that that can't happen. Now I put the remaining piece of the stomp switch in. Now I'm not going to pull it through all the way and socket it yet into the, or jam that into this thing yet. And the reason I'm not doing that quite yet is I want to get these leads for the PCB to go into my kit here. And it's much easier to do it when it's outside of the case. So that'll also give me the option here to start trimming things properly. So let's do that now. Now that those are trimmed, now I will finally secure the stomp switch. Alright, now let's finish wiring it up. Okay, so now, yes, we have our extra long wires for our input jacks, which we will just tuck off to the side here so that they don't get smashed by anything. And this is a really tight enclosure, but everything's pretty nice and neat as long as you keep things tight. Now, last two things we got to deal with is the negative and hot leads that ultimately go over to this LED. So if we remember from before, LEDs typically on long legs are the positive and the short leg is the negative. So we still have a little bit of those legs popping up over here, so we can now make these wires, which go for the LED, hit up them leads. So there we are. Everything's all wired up. Lastly, and sometimes this can be the most fun part, is we got to throw some knobs on here. Obviously, a smart thing to do is roll it all the way back, counterclockwise as far as you can. You can line your knobs up to that. There you are. Let's try it out. Alright, so now we're all set up here. Let's take my Strat and get a little bit of a clean sample. Alright, and now let's see if we get a blue LED and some noise. Sounds like it works to me. So there you go. That's the Unshaven Fuzz, all assembled and fully functioning. Have yourself a good one. Cheers.